Currently, Earth. On July 8th, in 1776, a 2,000-pound copper and tin bell, now known as the Liberty Bell, rings out from the tower of Pennsylvania State House, now Independence Hall, in Philadelphia, summoning citizens to the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence. 4 days earlier, the historic document had been adopted by delegates to the Continental Congress, but the bell didn't ring to announce the issuing of the document until the Declaration of Independence returned from the printer on July 8th. In 1751, to commemorate the 50-year anniversary of Pennsylvania's original Constitution, the Pennsylvania Provincial Assembly ordered the bell to be constructed. After being cracked during a test and then recast twice, the bell was hung from the State House steeple in June 1753. Rung to call the Pennsylvania Assembly together and to summon people for special announcements and events. It was also rung on important occasions, such as King George III's 1761 ascension to the British throne, and in 1765 to call the people together to discuss Parliament's controversial Stamp Act. With the outbreak of the American Revolution in April 1775, the bell was rung to announce the battles of Lexington and Concord. Its most famous tolling, however, was on July 8, 1776, when it summoned Philadelphia citizens for the first reading of our Declaration of Independence. The question of when the Liberty Bell acquired its famous fracture has been the subject of a good deal of historical debate. In the most commonly accepted account, the bell suffered a major break while tolling for the funeral of the Chief Justice of the United States, John Marshall, in 1835. And in 1846, the crack expanded to its present size while in use to mark Washington's birthday. After that date, it was regarded as unsuitable for ringing, but it was still ceremoniously tapped on occasion to commemorate important events. On June 6, 1944, when Allied forces invaded France, the sound of the bell's dulled ring was broadcast by radio across the United States. On July 8th, in 1950, the day after the UN Security Council recommended that all UN forces in Korea be placed under the command of the U.S. military, General Douglas MacArthur is appointed the head of the United Nations Command by President Harry S. Truman, our 33rd president. Douglas MacArthur, the son of a top-ranking Army general who fought in the Civil War, was commissioned as an Army lieutenant in 1903. During World War I, MacArthur served as a commander of the famed 84th Infantry Brigade. During the 1920s, he was stationed primarily in the Philippines, a United States Commonwealth, and in the first half of the 1930s, he served as the United States Army Chief of Staff. In 1935, with Japanese expansion underway in the Pacific, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, our 32nd president, appointed MacArthur military advisor to the government of the Philippines. In 1941, 5 months before Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, he was named commander of all U.S. armed forces in the Pacific. After the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, he conducted a defense of the Philippines against great odds. In March 1942, with Japanese victory imminent, Roosevelt ordered MacArthur to Australia, but the American general famously promised the Philippines, quote, "I shall return," unquote. 5 months later, the great U.S. counteroffensive against Japan began. On October 20th, 1944, after advancing island by island across the South Pacific, MacArthur waded onto the Philippine shore. 11 months later, he officiated the Japanese surrender and then served as the effective ruler of Japan during a productive 5-year occupation. After North Korea invaded South Korea on June 25th in 1950, MacArthur was appointed Supreme Commander of the U.S.-led UN force sent to aid the South. In September, he organized a risky but highly successful landing at Incheon, and by October, North Korean forces had been driven back across the 38th parallel. With President Truman's approval, UN forces crossed into North Korea and advanced all the way to the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and Communist China, despite warnings that this would provoke Chinese intervention. When China did intervene, forcing UN forces into a desperate retreat, MacArthur pressed for permission to bomb China. President Truman, fearing the Cold War implications of an expanded war in the Far East, refused. MacArthur then publicly threatened to escalate hostilities with China in defiance of Truman's stated war policy, leading Truman to fire him on April 11, 1951. For his action against General Douglas MacArthur, the celebrated hero of the war against Japan, Truman was subjected to a torrent of attacks, and some Republicans actually called for his impeachment. On April 17th, MacArthur returned to U.S. soil for the first time since World War II and was given a hero's welcome. 2 days later, he announced the end of his military career before a joint meeting of Congress, declaring, quote, "Old soldiers never die. They just fade away," unquote. After unsuccessfully running for the Republican presidential nomination in 1952, MacArthur did indeed fade from public view. He continued his eternity in 1964. On July 8th in 1951, Paris, the capital city of France, celebrates turning 2,000 years old. In fact, a few more candles would have technically been required on the birthday cake, as the City of Lights was most likely founded around 250 BC. The history of Paris can be traced back to the Gaelic tribe known as the Parisii, when sometime around 250 BC settled an island known today as the Ile de la Cité in the Seine River, which runs through present-day Paris. By 52 BC, Julius Caesar and the Romans had taken over the area, which eventually became Christianized and known as Lutetia, Latin for midwater dwelling. The settlement later spread to both the left and right banks of the Seine, and the name Lutetia was replaced with Paris. In 987 AD, Paris became the capital of France. As the city grew, the left bank earned a reputation as the intellectual district, while the right bank became known for business. During the French Renaissance period from the late 15th century to the early 17th century, Paris became a center of art, architecture, and science. In the mid-1800s, Napoleon III hired civic planner Georges Eugène Haussmann to modernize Paris. Haussmann's design gave the city-wide tree-lined boulevards, large public parks, a new sewer system, and other public work projects. The city continued to develop as an important hub for the arts and culture. In the 1860s, an artistic movement known as French Impression emerged, featuring the work of a group of Paris-based artists that included Claude Monet and Pierre-Auguste Renoir. Today, Paris is home to some 2 million residents, with an additional 10 million people living in the surrounding metropolitan area. The city retains its reputation as a center for food, fashion, commerce, and culture. Paris also continues to be one of the world's most popular tourist destinations, renowned for such sites as the Eiffel Tower, built in 1889 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution, the Arc de Triomphe, the Champs-Élysées, Notre Dame Cathedral, built in 1163, Luxembourg Gardens, and the Louvre Museum, home to Leonardo da Vinci's painting, Mona Lisa. All historic information documented on this audio file can be verified on history.com.